everyone, to the Seek, Go, Create podcast. This is your host, Tim Winders. I'm a coach for business owners, executives, and leaders. My wife and I consider ourselves nomads. We travel, live, and work in our 39-foot RV. I will tell you that today is somewhat unique in that I am actually in a sticks and bricks home. I'm visiting my family just east of Atlanta, so I'm not in the passenger seat of my RV recording my portion of the podcast. So I actually feel a little bit disoriented in being in an actual home. So anyway, listen, I want to ask one thing before I introduce our guest today. Make sure that you listen to the end of the podcast. We're going to include some special things for you, but primarily we'll include ways that you can continue the conversation that we start today. And listen, this is not about just a conversation today. We want to have dialogue and interact with you as we go forward. So please stay to the end so that you'll learn how you can do that. Today, we have Nicholas Hinrichsen as our guest. And Nicholas was, and I want to ask about that word was an avid golfer playing on Germany's national team for 4 years. After finishing his master's degree in Germany, he worked at Bain & Company, Merrill Lynch before relocating to the U.S. in 2011. After graduating from Stanford Business School in 2013, he joined the startup accelerator Y Combinator, raised venture capital in 2015, and eventually sold the company to Carvana.com in 2017. I told him as we started, I just had a family member purchase a car from Carvana, and we're going to have discussions about that because they actually were blown away with the experience. He's been working with Carvana.com ever since, which is on its way to becoming the world's largest used car company. They are obsessed, and I love that word, obsessed with creating exceptional customer experiences. He's got wide range of other items we're going to discuss as an investor and in venture capital. So anyway, Nicholas, welcome to the Seek, Go, Create podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. First question, I like to ask this right out of the gate. You and I are on an elevator, if we could even get on an elevator in the world we live in today with social distancing and all, but we're on an elevator. We've got about 5 or 6 floors to go up. And I look over and I said, hey, Nicholas, what do you do? You know, you've got a short period of time. Tell me what you do.
You just did it. But no, I think I would tell you, well, I was born and raised in Germany, as you can hear my accent. Parents are from Argentina. I used to play on the golf national team, decided not to turn pro, moved to the US to go to business school in Stanford, started my first company, sold it to Carvana, and now I'm in the process of starting another company. This time, we're focused on helping people with challenge credit improve their credit and get out of this loophole or vicious cycle of having bad credit. And so I'm really excited about working on that mission going forward from now on.
Yeah, I jumped over to that website. I think your folks sent the link to it. And so that's exciting. And I want to dive into that. But before we do that, there was a video that when I was just kind of snooping around, doing a little bit of research on you, that I found where you were discussing passion and what you were passionate about. And you were, I think, encouraging a group of, I think it was a collegiate group to really pursue passion. And what I'd love for you to do is, first of all, tell us what you're passionate about. You know, we had some great words in your bio that you're obsessed with exceptional customer service and some other things there. But what are you passionate about? And then I'm probably going to follow it up and ask you to kind of teach us a little bit about what passion means, like you did in that video.
Okay. Well, I feel flattered you'd see that video. I didn't think anybody would ever see it. So I appreciate you taking the time. Let's start with what I'm passionate about. I think it changes over the years. I really loved playing golf. Like, I didn't do it because I didn't have to, because I had time or it was my friends. I just really fell in love with the game. It's such a challenge. You play against yourself all the time. So if you play a tournament over 4 days, you think you play against the other players. No, you're constantly playing against yourself. And so I just really enjoyed the journey of being hard on myself, rewarding myself with good shots, and then keeping myself accountable. Really enjoyed that part of the sport. It's I think a unique sport in many ways. It's very challenging technically, but if you have discipline, you can actually master it. And then it's all in your head. Then you just need to believe in yourself and know how to calm down your temper if you're angry because you made a bad shot. And so I really enjoyed that part. Then when I started my first job, I did work at Bain and Company. I did work at Merrill Lynch. These were more like summer internship type experiences for 3 months each. And I actually didn't feel passionate about the work I was doing. I really enjoyed working with the colleagues, incredibly smart people. But I felt in my heart this was not what I really wanted to do. And instead I joined a very early stage company that invested in renewable energy projects in India and China. And so the main reason for joining them was definitely not financially. It was because I had the opportunity to travel and get to know new cultures. Since my parents are from Argentina originally, I used to be traveling a lot in childhood and my teens. But I'd never spent a lot of time in India and China, very different cultures from the ones that I knew. And so I really enjoyed that part, got really passionate about talking to people in the street. I remember when I was in Mumbai, I ran into this elephant on the street, couldn't believe it. It was just incredible, like incredible memories. And then the next step in my journey was going to Stanford Business School. There, I must be honest, I was lucky to get in. It's very, very hard to get in. Once you're in, the whole experience is around meeting very, very interesting people. And so what I realized is there were really two different types of people. There were some people who were specialists, like people who just nailed one specific topic or one specific, be it a sport or be it like working for an NGO. And I'll go into a good example in a second. And then there's more generalists. And I recognize about myself, I'm more of a generalist. Like there's nothing I'm particularly good at. Which makes it really hard when you want to start a company, because usually big companies are built out of problems you face and things you feel passionate about. And so part of the motivation to move to the US, go to Stanford, was to go into tech, start another company. And I got actually really frustrated through the 2 years experience in business school that I just couldn't find the one thing I care about enough to start a company. And it was when I ran into my now good friend and former co-founder, Chris Coleman, when it clicked, because he is incredibly passionate about cars. Like he loves cars, total car nut. His first car was a DeLorean, you know, the one from Back to the Future with these doors.
Yeah.
So that's passion. If that's your first car, and he bought it wrecked on Craigslist and fixed it up with his dad. And so what I learned about myself, and what I think is true for all these generalists out there, is if you don't know exactly what you feel passionate about to make it worthwhile spending your time solve your problems, just orient yourself and look at the other group of people who are very, very narrowly specialized in something, on a hobby. In my case, it was Chris being on cars, and just spend time with them, and you'll realize that they have insights that you don't have, but they often lack the ability to get going. And so Chris and I make what I think really strong teams, because like your podcast is Seek, Go, Create. He's the seeker, I'm the creator.
Oh, cool.
Or maybe go and create. He seeks and he has all these, he's so curious and knows everything and reads everything. But then when it's about to get going, that's where my strength comes into play. So this was a long-winded answer, but I hope there's a few nuggets that were helpful.
No, I actually took about a half a page of notes on just that
so
statement.
That makes you a fast writer.
Just so you know, and also so you know a little bit about my rhythm, and those people that are listeners know this. I usually spend some time researching, and I write out all these really cool, awesome questions. And then we usually start, and 5 minutes in, I've got these notes that usually take us in different directions, which is cool though. I like that flow. So there's a couple of things that I want to pull from what you just said, and maybe even go a little bit deeper. Because here's the first thing that came to mind when you brought up the specialist versus generalist. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell that wrote the book Outliers, that talked about the 10,000 hours that someone's supposed to do something. And, you know, we give examples of Tiger Woods and people that just started something when they're 5 years old, and they just do it until they're at a level that is unsurpassed. I was never that either. I have so many interests, so many things that I love, maybe things I'm okay at, maybe some things I'm better than okay. Maybe I think maybe we're delusional too, you know, but really I love the breadth of a lot of things. Well, a couple of years ago, I read a book by David Epstein called Range, which is the antithesis or the counter to Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. And Nicholas, he talks about Roger Federer, who basically started playing tennis when he was a late teenager. He's very involved with the fashion industry, with the design, and he's very well read in a lot of areas. He's great at tennis, world class, obviously, but he would be the counter to that. And so to me, I think you and I fit in that range. We have this, I don't know if it's curiosity. I mean, are you curious about a lot of things?
I'm, yeah, ridiculously curious. I ask all these questions. My friends get annoyed.
Yeah. You ask a lot of questions, and
I don't stop.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're not antagonistic. It's because you truly want to know about a lot of different things, correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It's so I don't know the second book. I took a note, I'll read it because I'm fascinated. Outliers is such a good book for two reasons. A, the 10,000 hours. 10,000 is like, it's hard to grasp what type of order of magnitude. That's more than a year has hours. And a year usually you sleep at least half of it or one third of it. So it really requires dedication. And funny enough, I believe, I haven't counted, but I could imagine that I got close to 10,000 hours playing golf. So I don't think it's universally true that I didn't have like this narrow-minded focus. What I do believe though is from then on, like now that I need to ask myself, or want to ask myself, what's a topic I want to spend my time on? That's where it becomes a little tough. And that's why it's really helpful to have Chris, who 100% has spent 10,000 hours on thinking about cars.
Yeah. And then we get a question like, give me your elevator pitch, or what do you do? And I do lots of things.
Yeah, I do a lot of things. That's true.
Yeah. But I mean, that's not a bad thing, because I think we need the self-awareness to know not really where we fit, but what does drive that passion in us. What are your thoughts on that?
Agree. I think, well, you can't change the way you are, right? You can work on yourself, you can get marginally better and find your blind spots and make sure you're aware of them, but you can't add $10,000 of passion to a specific topic in your past. Like the only thing you can do, you can have it in front of you and then spend time on it. So don't force yourself, like don't be hard on yourself. I caught myself during business school being hard on myself, that I just didn't know which direction to go, and I felt like I might not be a good entrepreneur. And so what I needed to find for myself is, I'm just not that guy. Like I'm not the guy who has these deep rooted hobbies, this one thing I'm so excited about to spend all my life on. But I don't actually think you need that. I think you need somebody in the founding team to have that passion.
Right. Yeah. Someone like a Chris, who it's
Exactly.
cars. He's
Yeah.
always going to be in that car space, it sounds like.
Yeah, 100% for the rest of his life. He was, for a little context, he went to McKinsey. No, he wanted to become um, so he went to MIT undergrad, studied mechanical engineering, wanted to be an engineer at one of the Formula One companies. And so
Mm,
he actually looked into the space and realized, well, if I did that, I would like do research on one screw, not on the vehicle. Like I want the big picture. And so he went to McKinsey thinking that he could like jump into, take a, like through, use it as a springboard into like a managerial role in a car company. Ended up working for McLaren in the UK, like indeed a Formula One company. Between first and second year of business school, didn't enjoy, like didn't, he loved the product, but building business is just not a great business. Building cars isn't a great business. And then he was like, found this dilemma. I really love this, but I don't think this is the best use of my time. And so that's how we ended up starting our company, where we started, believe it or not, helping our classmates sell their used cars.
really? So it
Yeah.
was to fill it. It was to fill a need, which
People
is,
asked us, yeah, people asked us very explicitly. Yeah, they asked Chris. Of course they asked Chris, because he knows everything about cars. So
yeah,
naturally, if you need to sell your car and you just have these 400 new friends that you met at business school, obviously you'll ask the car guy, what should I do with my car? And
yeah.
I happened to be right next to him when all these questions came, and I was confused. And Chris like, should we just sell those cars and see what happens? I thought that's crazy. And
Yeah.
so we ended up selling our classmates' cars. We detailed them the day of graduation, took photos, listed them on Craigslist, went on all these test drives, and yeah, that's how we started.
So I know it had a big impact on your future, but you mentioned being frustrated at Stanford Business School, and probably because you were seeking out where you fit and how you interacted. But would you do that again? And with the mindset that you have now, would you do it differently, I guess would
No,
be the
I
thing.
was frustrated mainly with myself that I
Okay.
just couldn't find what I want to work on. And I felt like there's all these brilliant people around me. Everybody's starting companies. What's wrong with me? Why don't I have this thing that you need to start a company? That was the frustration. Business school was an incredible experience. You
Yeah.
go into it with very different expectation than you go out of it. I went into it as, yeah, I so I get caught up in details quickly, or that's what I used to. If you work with me now, you'd be surprised, because like I was had this high level of attention to lots of details, but spend a lot of time in spreadsheets.
Uh-huh.
And so one of my objectives was like, see the bigger picture, see the forest, and not only the trees. And so I feel like business school taught me like that lesson, and it made me be, which that I think is important for an entrepreneur. Like you look for step changes, you look for big differences, not small improvements. And so I feel like I learned that while in business school, talking to my classmates, because most of what you learn, you do learn from your classmates. They have these incredible backgrounds. And so, yeah, that helped me find the big picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. And another thing you mentioned earlier that triggered it when you were first talking about passion, you mentioned travel.
Yep.
You talked about being on the streets of Mumbai. I've been to Mumbai. I actually have some clients that are in Mumbai,
You
which
do? I love
is
that
really,
city.
really cool and fun. That's a very interesting country, interesting part of the world.
Yeah.
I have this theory. My wife and I have been traveling essentially since 2013,
All over the
and
US?
all over the place. We actually spent a good bit of time in New Zealand and Australia, and kind of lived there
Incredible.
for around 9 months, and then traveled around the U.S. And then about a year and a half ago, moved into an RV. And so we actually believe that we're in the perfect social distancing lifestyle
You
and
are.
situation.
You are 100%. I actually just went to Yellowstone. Chris and I, after we left Carvana 3 weeks ago, he and I rented a little cabin near Yellowstone, and then we drove up there and just took a week off. Very socially
Nice.
distant.
Yeah. And how was it up there, especially with all that's going on? Because our son is actually traveling and going to be trying to get up that way. He loves Jackson and the Tetons and
Oh
all.
yeah, yeah. So that we went to the Tetons. So when we got so lucky, because when we arrived, the park had opened a day or two before.
Hmm.
And so all the international tourists aren't there. So as you can imagine, there's not a lot of people, but there's a lot to see. You can spend literally going straight down the road 3 hours in Yellowstone. You're still in the park. It's so big. I'm
Sure.
from Europe. You're just not used to the scale things can have here.
So a few things that you mentioned that you're a generalist. You mentioned that you love to travel. And one other thing that you said related to anyway, but you and an entrepreneur, you kind of talked about all of those things. I'm going to kind of mash all those together
Okay.
because to me, there is a certain degree of, I don't want to say non-complacency or frustration with the present, or, I mean, there's a lot of things I could throw at it. Desire or hunger for something different. Does all that fit into that? Because, I would guess if I were to tell you that you were going to sit in an office for 30 years I don't care where it was in the world. I mean, if it were in the Bay Area, if it were in New York, or if it were in, the middle of Iowa, you would probably get a little bit antsy and not be excited about it. Would that be true?
Yeah, I think that's a fair description. You made it sound negative, like disappointment or complacent. There's just anxiety because of inspiration, I would call it.
Oh,
There's so many
awesome.
things you can do.
Yeah, the potential, what's out there in the
Exactly.
world. And so one of the things I've always had this theory about with entrepreneurs, this is in the entrepreneur category, our podcast. And one thing that's always been amazing is sometimes entrepreneurs, we don't stay with one thing very long at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And I remember I had someone ask me the question one time, because I worked corporate right when I came out of Georgia Tech, and I was bouncing around jobs within this one large corporation. And someone, a family member, well loving and all, said, "Hey, can you stick with anything at all? Or are you just bouncing around. Well, I was bored, 3 days I stepped in there. So how do you define, and especially with your experience at Stanford and all that you're doing, how do you define entrepreneurship? I mean, is there a good definition that you have, or some characteristics or traits?
Um, like I don't think there's a unique description, because if you look at all the entrepreneurs, they're all very different. Like they become very strong opinionated. So like think of Elon Musk, or think of Mark Zuckerberg, or think of all these entrepreneurs. They come across as very like strong, having strong opinions. I think that's the outcome of the journey, because on day one you tell somebody a story of here's what I want to build, and everybody looks at you and said you're crazy. It can't work. And so the journey of an entrepreneur is to just not take no as an answer ever, because the second you do, you just agree that the status quo is ideal, which I don't think it is ever. And so entrepreneurs don't take no as an answer. They're, I think, frugal people. They're willing to hack things together. They're not ashamed. They're not embarrassed putting products in front of people to test whether they work. And then I don't think they say they disagree to everything just because of the sake of disagreeing. I think they're actually very smart people and understand most things are right. And I also don't understand most things. There's just this one insight that I have that makes me believe that the world is this way, but should be that way. I think that's what, at least I think that's true for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's good. Is it, and I don't want to say there is a certain degree of looking at things and thinking that it can be better. And a number of people look at things. I'll give you an example. You guys are part of a company, and I want to get into the details of the history of this in a little while. So I don't want to dive into it yet, but
Yeah.
you're part of what I would say is a disruption in an industry. Listen, 10 years ago, if I wanted a used car, well, 10 years ago, there was a few that were starting to develop nationwide, but let's just say a few years back, you look through some classified ads. I'm old enough to remember buying my first
They
car.
used to be offline.
Yeah. Offline, like an actual newspaper. And I, would highlight and circle. I'd pick up the phone and call. I would go look. I mean, my first car I bought, I'm dating myself, I spent $400 for a 74 Vega. Most people on this call will not even know what a Vega is. You may not even know what a Vega is.
I don't. Chris would.
It was the worst engineered. It was, anyway, horrible. But so you guys began disrupting, but was it a total disruption, or were you just tweaking? I mean, that's something that I always look at with like an Uber and places like that. Were they really disrupting, or are they just methodically improving upon something that's already there?
Yeah. Disruption is an interesting word because it's been coined by Clay Christensen, the Harvard professor who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma.
Yeah.
If you were to ask me a good book to read, I would tell you that one. I think he defines there's two types of disruption: a low end market disruption, I think, and a new market disruption. Mm-hmm. One is you just take the customers all the other incumbents don't want to deal with, and you create a good experience for them, and then you just expand from there. The other one is more like product has never been sold and now it's new and creates value. Uh-huh. Let's see, what did we do? I'll talk about our company first, and then I explain Carvana. Carvana is just fascinating and incredible. Yeah. Incredible, and I'll tell you why in a second. Our company, our conviction was there must be an audience out there that is willing to buy online, because if the people exist, then there is a more affordable, a cheaper, quote unquote, way to get the cars to customers, and so we can offer cars cheaper. Mm-hmm. Like in our case, we advertised vehicles that were not in our inventory, but in the inventory of institutional sellers, be it leasing companies or rental companies, straight to the consumer. Usually they go through wholesale auction to a dealership and then to the consumer. And we thought if we find an audience that buys online, they can have access to these cars. Hence, cars will be cheaper, and then you'll create a flywheel. And so that was true. That was true. That was particularly true for two types of audiences: people who were not emotional about a car purchase because they couldn't test drive, And these were Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, people who just knew exactly what they wanted and they wanted to pay the lowest price for it. While on the other audience, and this is something we tapped into without realizing, this was just serendipity, people who lease vehicles. And then at the end of the lease, love their vehicle, but the residual value, so what it would cost to buy the car, is much higher than what the car costs in the retail market. So in our case, and again, we didn't notice that until, like with hindsight, it made sense, but we didn't notice when it happened. There was this Nissan Leaf, this first electric vehicle that was sold in a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
Nissan needed to sell them, and the way OEMs can promote sales is by offering really, really attractive leases. So the lease for the vehicle was probably $150 or so a month, or maybe $200 a month. And then after 2 or 3 years, the car has a residual value for which you can purchase the vehicle. But
Mm-hmm.
since these lease payments were so low, the residual was very high. And then for people who didn't buy the vehicle, these vehicles would all end up at what's called the wholesale auction, the marketplace where dealerships buy their vehicles from. Sorry. And since the market was flooded because nobody bought these cars, the prices to buy these cars from wholesale for me as a dealership were incredibly low. And
Right.
then if I offered these cars directly to consumer, the difference was literally the first person to buy a car from us was a 65-year-old person, completely different than we expected, who had a Nissan Leaf on a lease, was offered to buy it for $20,000, and we were offering them for $14,000. And so he bought almost the identical car from us with lower miles. And so these two audiences were people who were willing to do something that nobody else was willing to do, buy a car online. And then from there, going mainstream, I think would then manifest like the total disruption. We didn't achieve that in our company. We just couldn't do it, because then you need to be able to offer financing to a bigger audience with lower credit. Like, I don't think we truly fit that definition. Carvana, however, I think would. The way Carvana did it was fully vertically integrated, had the same approach. We'll find an audience, the first audience willing to buy online. Then it's all about customer experience. If you have a good experience, you tell your neighbor, exactly as you said earlier, your neighbor will start buying. And all of a sudden you go from like this think of it as a bowling alley. You kick over the first pin, and then they start falling because people talk about it. And so Carvana did a very, very, very good job in doing so. And then you get tailwinds. This happens in a lot of startups where you just fight and fight and fight and fight and fight, and people think it's crazy to buy a car online, and then COVID happens, and now people think it's crazy to buy a car offline.
Yeah.
And so this is how startups go from early adopters to slowly crossing the chasm, and all of a sudden mass market realizes, oh, that's the way to go. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. In fact, I want to put an actual story on it. Our daughter and son-in-law, kind of in the middle of all that was going on during, shutdowns, lockdowns and all, kind of decided that it was time for them to get a new car. They had they had our first grandchild back in February.
Oh,
They
congrats.
realized their car didn't fit. So they would be, and this would have been, one of the first major purchases for them as a young couple. And they could not go out to any dealerships. They were all closed down, or they wanted appointments, or they went and, sometimes dealerships are weird without a pandemic. You know what I mean? And
Been
I'm
there,
not,
done
listen, I
that.
know that, yeah, I know I've got some good friends that they have some dealerships. They have used car dealerships and all too. And so I'm not saying anything, but listen, I don't think it's anything high on people's list that they desire to go do is to really go car shopping. I mean, maybe there are, I don't know, maybe your buddy, Chris, he loves going and looking at cars. Most people would rather not do it, but also kind of what you said, it's hard to imagine people buying a car online.
Well,
I
it
mean,
is and it isn't. Like, to me, it's not anymore. And
eh,
I'm sure to your daughter and son-in-law, they'll tell you it's crazy not to.
yeah, because here's the rest of the story. They kept asking me, and Dad here going, I don't know much about it. Y'all just check it out. And so they were comparing it to locals. What they did though, this was kind of the thing that helped. Maybe it's the lease model that you just mentioned. they bought a car that was similar to one that we had. It was like a Hyundai Tucson that was just a
Oh,
couple
nice.
years old.
Yep.
And so they were able to drive it. They were familiar with it. It wasn't like an entirely different vehicle that they weren't familiar with. It's kind of like the lease thing, right?
Yeah, it's very similar. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. But you said yourself there was a big hurdle, and had they not been forced to, they wouldn't have tried it, because in doubt, it's a very big purchase, very emotional also, and you want to test drive. But I'd be very surprised if your daughter and son-in-law didn't buy your car, their next car from Carvana again, because it was a good experience. That's all we're trying to do.
Oh, it was fantastic. So she went ahead and, pushed by after she went through the process. And she kept saying, this is such an easy process online. Of course, there was not a car there yet. And a few days later,
Showed up
flatbed truck.
in a Wimmer holler, yeah.
Yeah, flatbed truck shows up and there's the car. And she goes, wow, it's actually more impressive than what we kind of thought, clean and all that type thing. And I said, well, listen, why don't you schedule an appointment at the dealership to get it checked over during your 7-day period? So this is the best part. And I think you guys will dig this. They went to the Hyundai dealership. This was out in Colorado Springs, and pulled in, of course, had the Carvana tags on the front and back, I think. And the manager of the service department came out kind of chuckling. He said, oh, Carvana, huh? And he says, you need oil change? What do you need? We need to check it. He goes, well, we just got it. We just wanted to check it out if we need to pay something and all. So anyway, the manager of the shop came out and said, this car is in fantastic shape, excellent condition. Oil doesn't need change. Everything's good. Tire, everything is in great shape. And so they walked away with an absolutely phenomenal experience. And like you said, not only are they going to do it, but I just, on my podcast, to who knows how many listeners, shared the story. So
that's why it's important to be obsessed with customer experience, because then Tim talks about it.
yeah. So how have they captured that customer experience? It's one thing, everybody talks about customer, but, in your intro it says, obsessed with customer service. What are some of the things that, we've got a lot of business owners here. What are some of the things that they tapped into, and what are some things that we all can learn from that?
I'm going to give you all my personal opinions. I think that's also what matters much more. And I'll tell you what we did wrong. I think that makes it even more interesting.
Ooh, that would be awesome.
Chris and I are like hyper rational. We looked at the car market. We're like, okay, so you as a private person, you own this lease, you give it back to the dealer. It actually is part of the OEM family now. Now it needs to go to other dealership, physically be transported, go to the wholesale auction, go to the next dealership, and then go to the customer. Like, there's 10 steps, literally 10 steps, a lot of them physically moving the car. That just doesn't feel efficient.
Right.
And so we said, if we figure out a way to cut out more steps, make it more direct, the most direct transaction would be from private party to private party. That's how we started. The problem is you have two individuals who don't understand cars that well and prices, and so they have very different expectations. Peer-to-peer, very hard to make work. But there's institution to peer, so we can skip the wholesale auction and the dealership, which also means transporting the vehicle twice and paying two institution money. And so as a result, the math worked out. We were able to offer cars cheaper. What we ended up doing, we listed these cars on, same as you mentioned, classified. Now there's the online version of it. And as a result, as you'd expect, most of our cars were the first one in the search results because we were priced cheaper and the consumer sorts by price. And so our conviction was, well, our job is done. Now we just sit down and wait. People will call us. And that was true. We were getting a lot of calls, emails, and text messages, much more than any other dealership we knew, because our price was low. We were always first in the search result. What we underestimated is the emotional component of a car sale. And admittedly, like, I would always catch myself making a mistake again. And so I'm glad I recognize that. A car purchase is incredibly emotional. Like, you need to speak to people's emotions and not only price. It all starts with price because that's how you get the quote unquote lead. But then you need to really understand the situation of your daughter. She had a kid. They need to go to a new car. There was the pandemic going on. Like, there's so many things going on. And so the most important part, I think, once you have a product is understanding the emotions of your customers. And I think Carvana did an exceptional job doing that.
Right. So how, I may not know how they did that because I didn't go through the process. How does one, all right, so you guys very rational, which truthfully I get. That's kind of
Yeah, that's
my,
how you think. Yeah.
it's very rational. Come on, but it
Literally
doesn't
come on
really,
and people don't do it. The way the journey starts for Carvana is usually like there's multiple marketing channel, but I think the one that at least my friends remind me of all the time, TV ads. And so the TV ads are just exceptional. The team creating them is exceptional. I love all of them. I'm so impressed. I wish I could think like these guys think. They're incredibly creative, and they're exactly the other, like the counter thinking of me being hyper rational. They think incredibly emotional. They've been in the industry for a long time, and they're creating TV ads that just really seem to resonate with our customers.
yeah. If you guys didn't go through the acquisition with Carvana,
Yep.
with your company, have you thought through maybe where you would be now? Could you have pivoted? Could you have made that adjustment at
Good
all?
question. Yeah. So for a little more context, we started a car business, like a heavy operational business. We were selling around 150 cars a month.
Hmm.
Um, that's meaningful in a certain, like in a small geography. So compared to other independent dealerships, that wasn't bad. That was pretty good. Um, we just didn't think we can get to scale, and so we built an operational business. What we ended up selling was a team and software.
Okay.
And so what we ended up selling was very different than what we started out. What would we have done if there hadn't been an acquisition? Chris and I actually had fundraising conversations. And so we dual tracked, triple tracked multiple options. One would have been raise more money and then either iterate on the value proposition or figure out something else that we could do. And interestingly, and this will make you laugh, one thing we looked into was helping customers with bad credit get out of bad credit. And so the reason I'm saying that is if you go to the dealership, what usually happens is you negotiate on the price on the car.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you feel like, okay, I won the battle, I'm getting the price I want, then the dealership asks you, how are you going to pay for this car? And your answer is, oh, I need a loan. Dealer says, no problem. I work with 100 lenders. I can help you. And now you have the dilemma of you and the dealer wanting different things. You want the lowest rates. The dealer wants to make money, rightly so, because you just negotiated endlessly with him on the car.
Mm-hmm.
And so he'll refer you to the lender that pays him the highest referral fee. That's just what happens, especially if you're not in the prime segment. If you have perfect credit, you know what your rate would be. If your credit score is, say, below 700, you actually don't know. It's very opaque. And since people shop for cars and not loans, you're very uninformed by the time you have the conversation around your loan. And so we feel like that information asymmetry and then these disincentives is something that's worth exploring and aligning. And the first time the idea came up was during the process of potentially selling our previous company. And so now, for more context, fast forward, Chris and I left Carvana 3 weeks ago, and that's exactly where we start off. Like we want to help people with bad credit, challenge credit, get out of the hole because they're making these really high payments on their car, although their credit might have already migrated to a more positive one.
Right.
And for refinancing, that's the first help, but then all the car ownership expenses, be it insurance products or gap insurance, which is an insurance product you buy, or warranties, all of these products, like you want to constantly adjust that to your needs, and there's nobody out there that does it in a digital way.
Right. So one of the things that it appears that you have done with at least these models is filled some gaps. There were some gaps that were identified, but it's also interesting. I'm always fascinated by the journey that we go on.
Yeah.
Because earlier you mentioned that you and Chris, you guys started and you used the word iteration, so we could say, but you didn't realize that there was a gap between, some of the large institutional, the coming off lease and things, and people that were also coming off of a lease. And you played matchmaker there, truthfully,
Yeah.
but you didn't realize that until after you started, correct?
Yeah. So We had one ambition and we thought people did it for one reason, and we landed somewhere else and people did it for another reason.
Yeah.
um, you just need to give yourself the opportunity. I think entrepreneurship, starting companies, all about giving yourself the opportunity to be surprised.
Yeah.
One of our closest investors and friends and very impressive entrepreneur, he always says, savor surprises. So you have to get going with something. Know that what you'll end up doing in the end is going to be very different. And the pivots you make, the changes you make to the product are because of surprises that you encounter.
Right. So I want to ask a couple more questions about that topic before we go into, and I want you to kind of tell the story and let us know all that you're doing with this new
Okay.
venture that you have and some of the other projects you've got going. There are many people that they will not start something until they know 90% of what it's going to look like, or they've gone through the business plan. Even if they've gone through the lean startup,
Yeah.
they still may have this mindset of, I can't start unless I know not just what B and C looks like, but I need to know all the way to M, N, O, P, Q, whatever.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm guessing, if I'm wrong, you tell me, I'm guessing you guys had a business plan, but you pivoted fairly quickly. And I guess the question is this: did you have a business plan? And how closely did the actual real world business mirror the original plan that you had?
I think it was it Mike Tyson who says everybody has a plan until I punch you in the face?
Yeah, until you get punched in the face, and then it's like, okay, game on. Now we got a fight on our hands.
Well, in a startup, that happens on day one. Like your plan is as good as the next 6 hours or so. That's why if you're in Silicon Valley, for example, very experienced venture capitalist, I've not been asked for a business plan early on, like in the early stages of a company. They don't ask you for a business plan. They ask you, what's the problem that you're trying to address? Who cares? Is it big? And are you uniquely positioned to figure out a solution? And if you have an idea already, tell me that. That's how very early stage companies get funded in Silicon Valley. Nobody will ask you, what's your budget for the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months? Like people would ask, and they ask out of curiosity, but the answer they want to get is not a number. The answer they want to get is, where's the emphasis? Like, are you going to use a lot of money to acquire customers? If you have to do that, might not be as good of a business as if it's something that can virally grow. And so they ask you these questions in order to understand how you're thinking about the business, and less so around, do you know exactly what you'll do the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months? Because everybody knows you just can't impossibly know. The best example that I love mentioning is, I forgot his name. We can look him up. Do you know the company Slack? The
Yes.
messaging app? Yeah. So the founder of Slack, first company he started was a gaming company. He pivoted and started Flickr, sold it.
Yeah.
He then said, this time I'll start a gaming company, starts a gaming company, pivots, ends up selling Slack or going public with Slack. And if you ask him, or if there's interviews about him, people asking him, what's the next thing? He's like, I guess I'll start a gaming company. But things change. These things always change. You just need to give yourself a chance at finding out what actually gets traction.
Right. And that's an excellent message there. Almost a quotable item. Give yourself a chance. I'm going to ask you to do something that might be tough, but I know we have a lot of listeners outside of a Silicon Valley environment. We'll even say mom and pop businesses or people that have an idea that, it may not be this huge sweeping problem to solve, but they may be frozen in how to get started or go to the next step. Nicholas, can you give, even if it's just encouragement, can you give just some get started tips if someone thinks they've got a thought, an idea, even if it's a better way to be a plumber or something like that, anything like that would be helpful for folks that are outside of, let's say, the venture capital world?
Yeah. So one thought in venture capital, because that's the space I'm most familiar with.
Yep.
Everything has changed since the pandemic. When I used to meet funds and investors in person, I would drive up and down Silicon Valley from San Francisco to Menlo Park and back. All
Yeah.
these meetings are online, works exactly the same way, so high quality meetings. And so this is great, which also means founders all of a sudden don't have to be in the Bay Area anymore. They can be everywhere. And since cost of living have risen a lot over the last, I don't know, ever since I moved there 9 years ago, yeah. Now having a distributed team is a very positive thing, for example. So
Yeah.
that's just a side note. The investors that used to have monopolies in Silicon Valley are now everywhere thanks to Zoom and
Yeah.
pandemic. I think there's very different ways though to start a company. It's like step 1 or 2 or 3. If you have a conviction and if you have an idea and it happens to be a product, platforms like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, for example, are great. And the reason I'm saying that is not because you want to have revenue, but you can get money, like future revenue, as a source to develop your product today. You basically pre-sell your product. You just need to find an audience, and it's all about selling, right? Ultimately, when you start a new company, you're selling investors, you're selling employees on a vision. You can do the same thing there. I think it's more social media driven, so it lends itself a lot for individuals who, if you hustle, you'll get your way. And so I think that's how I would start.
Yeah.
What I think I would avoid doing is, that's the advice I'm getting, don't invest too much of your own capital,
Mm.
because you have, like in life, you have time and cash, like time and savings. And if you put all your eggs, your savings and your time into the same basket, I think that's risky. And very few of the entrepreneurs have done that. Most of them either hadn't had any money when they started or took out money early on in the process just to diversify their portfolio and then be fearless on what they do day to day. So those would be my thoughts.
Yeah. And that's good. And I want to circle back to what you said is the conversation that someone has in venture capital Silicon Valley, which is, what is the problem? Who cares? Is it
Yep.
big? The thing that I see value on with Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or if you're just going to friends or family and saying, hey, listen, will you get involved? Is people with clarity describing what they're trying to do.
True. True. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's Mark Twain had this incredible, I love Mark Twain. I'm not even born and raised in the US, but I love just his use of the English language. He said, I didn't have the time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long letter. And so I fall into that trap all the time where I'm writing this really smart email. I'm like, I don't think anybody's going to read this. And then you spend time and the outcome is one paragraph that's really crisp and gets the message across. And that's just how people communicate. The attention span is so short. I think that's a skill, trainable skill.
Yeah. And one thing that happens, we started this off talking about passion. If someone is passionate about cars, let's say your buddy Chris, and they're wanting to start a business in that field or arena, people probably don't want to know how a car is built.
No, and there's a true risk. He describes it as being, apologize the language, peak idiot. He just knew so much that he was very dangerous, but he didn't actually know everything. And so if he was here, which would have been really fun, he says he was so humbled in the first months or a couple of months after we started, because he thought he understood the space and then realized he didn't. And so, yeah, you don't make yourself believe you understand what you're doing, because once you take a step further, you're like, oh, this is all new territory to me.
Sure. Well, that's excellent. Thank you for that advice. A couple other questions I want to address before because I think I want us to wrap with you kind of laying out what
Sure.
you guys are doing now and
Yep.
let people know how they can connect with you and even take advantage of all of that. But you mentioned that you had come to the US in 2011, I believe it was,
Yep.
that your parents were from Argentina. You spent some time in Germany. We're in such a weird world right now, Nicholas. And we've got a lot of, and I don't really want to get into the political weeds, but there's so many people that are thinking so nationalist. I really love talking to people that have traveled and had exposure outside.
Yep.
What was that like for you moving to the US in 2011? Was it for school or were you
I went,
coming here to do
yeah,
startup? Okay.
no, straight to Stanford Business School. Yeah. It's funny that you say that, and it's flattering that you like internationals. Most of my friends from business school, not all of them, but most of the internationals found themselves very quickly, and those were the early friendships we formed. For example, we first year business school, we live on campus. Second year, you find houses nearby, and we found these 4 houses super close to each other, fitting 4 people each. So there are 16 people from 13 different nations. It's a very, very international group.
Yeah.
And so I think the reason being is that, like, the reason I enjoy traveling is because you just get to know new cultures and perspectives, and you have a conversation and you about a topic that you've had the conversation 10 times with your friends at home, and all of a sudden in a new country, maybe even a new language, which makes it even more fun. Yeah, and people add angles that you haven't even thought about. Like, they have problems that you haven't thought about. They have like cultural aspects that you haven't thought about because you just didn't know. And I think it creates some curiosity. And when I talk to internationals, I feel like even small talk conversations go quickly much deeper into, hey, tell me, what have you learned? And then you also listen. You learn to listen. I'm
Yeah.
not saying Americans don't listen, but I felt like internationals don't start out with a pitch. This is me. Like, that's why when you asked me the elevator pitch, I became really uncomfortable. Americans are trained to do that, and they're exceptional doing that. They come across as so confident, which is awesome. I wish I came across that way. But then I think to go from there to past small talk, I always struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
I found my ways, and I feel really at home, and I have the green card, and I'm lucky to be here, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm not planning on leaving anytime soon. But there is a little bit that dynamic where, like, how do I get to know the person in front of me? Because right now I'm just seeing this picture perfect person, and I don't know how to maneuver myself around it. Versus internationals who tend to be humble and and create transparency easier, so you can actually talk about things that I think a little bit deeper, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's so good too. One of the things that helped me when we traveled was just getting other perspectives. There's a big world out there.
Yep.
There's a lot of people. And in general, people, they want their families to do well. They show love to people. They like being loved. We like being, and I do think, and I think this is actually shifting. And listen, I've lived sort of in the United States most of my life. I think there's a little bit of a shifting. I don't know if the United States is being humbled or what. I just think, like you, there's so much value to interacting with people that have a different perspective.
Yeah, diversity is, I think, very, very important.
Yeah. And even diversity, we're in a time as we record this in summer of 2020 where, diversity is kind of relating to skin color and sex and all of those things. But I actually, and this is why I enjoy our conversation. See, to me, diversity is what goes on inside this head here, the
Yeah, I
mind.
agree. Both dimensions are true.
Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with maybe, how you grew up and where you grew up. I grew up in the Southern US, and I kind of think to myself at times, what are some of the good things because of where I grew up? And what are some of the hurdles I've had to overcome? And anyway, that's very cool.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think I still have to digest what's going on out here. It's sad, and it's not ideal. I think it's a very difficult topic. Also, it's a very difficult topic for the country. Like, it's not, the answers aren't easy.
Yeah. And we're at the time we're recording this, obviously there's a lot of turmoil and a lot of things that are going on, and we're just hopeful that things can get better. And so let's talk about now what you've done since you sold to Carvana. I think you actually started doing a lot of other investing, because on your LinkedIn profile, you've got investing in a pretty wide, go back to generalist range, both country and also industry that you're invested in. And I guess I wanted to ask, did that lead to, I know the car finance that we're going to talk about here, the digital auto finance platform, but talk a little bit about that journey that led up to this new company.
So the last 3 years I was like fully committed and working really, really, really hard at Carvana. So I wasn't like doing multiple things at the time. What I did do though is when I still ran my company for the first 4 years after business school, we were heads down and like working 7 days a week. Then when I became an employee, at least I got my weekends back. And since a lot of my friends were the same age as I am, I went to a lot of weddings. A lot of these weddings very internationally, and my favorite place is South America. I just love it. My parents are from Argentina. My cousins live in Argentina. I have a lot of friends there. And so I got exposed to like these cultures that I love, to friends who I either knew from before or friends of friends. And then Latin America is a little behind when it comes to the startup ecosystem. Like obviously the US is at the forefront. Germany is actually catching up quite a bit, which is exciting. Latin America is a little behind, which means ideas that worked in the US have yet to be tried in South America.
Mm.
And so a lot of my friends, they just realized that they went to schools in the US, went back to their home countries to just contribute to solving the problems there. And so a lot of these friends of mine went back with ideas that worked in the US and are starting to roll them out in Latin America. And so it started with weddings, at me meeting these people, and I love, like, the way I invest is nothing that I would copy. I love Latin America, so most of the investments are Latin America. I love the people that I met, so these are all friends. And then these happen to be businesses that most of them have worked in the US before.
Okay.
But yeah, that's how I've been thinking about it. And then I got lucky with the exit of my company. I had some disposable cash to invest, mainly because they're friends. Like, I want them to be successful. I had a lot of help from people who I appreciate and thank a lot. And so I want to, to the extent possible, give that back.
Sure. So the typical, as I understand it, the typical VC model is you invest in 10 in the hope or belief that 1 to 2
Yep.
might take off, might become unicorn, whatever all these words that we use.
Yeah.
What's the 1 or 2? And obviously if these are friends, then you might be alienating other friends if they listen to this, but what are the 1 or 2 businesses that you really like the way it's looking right now of those? And if you want to like say, I can't answer.
No, I can't answer. I think that my 2 favorite ones are, one is called, and that doesn't mean the others are bad. It's just I love what they're doing.
Okay. Very diplomatic.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but it's true. They're, luckily all of them are doing well, and that will not be true forever. But
yeah.
So the 2 cool ones that I like is, one is called Mimic, one is called So Smile. Mimic, think of Travis Kalanick's Cloud Kitchen. So Travis, who started Uber, went on and he's building these kitchens that you don't see. They're industrial kitchens. You can't see them, that restaurants rent to produce food for food delivery.
Just delivery only.
Exactly.
How,
exactly.
and he started that before March of 2020 when a pandemic hit and everything shut down.
So Travis saw it coming, and then my friend just opened one of those in Brazil, and he went from his first. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit localized, the offering. In his case, he licenses the recipes from other restaurants, from brands. And then when you go to the aggregator, be it DoorDash or Uber Eats, you see, oh, this restaurant, this burger, in his case, burgers. But the one who fulfills the delivery is not the restaurant, it's him. And so he's paying royalties. And so he started with a burger brand. So every time I call him, I ask him, how many burgers did he sell today? And he went, I made the investment, I think, late last year or so. I saw him for New Year's when I was in Sao Paulo, and he said, yeah, we're doing 2,000 burgers a day, which I thought was a lot. Pandemic hit, now he's doing 15,000. So yeah, that just went through the roof, and it's perfect. It's very early stage. Nobody knows where the journey goes, but I just love that business, and I love him. He's the best. And the other one is, think of Invisalign, like braces. But for Latin America. And so what I love about that is, the guy is just incredible. Like, I want to be like him as a founder. But also Latin America is starting to have like a middle class, and people in South America are vain, not in a negative way, in a, I think, positive way. And your teeth just make so much of your first impression.
Yeah.
And braces are very expensive. See, there's the snap.
Yeah.
And so I feel like he's building a good business, which I'm excited about, but he's also helping people like create a different first impression. I think it becomes like a flywheel, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Um, and so I had braces when I was a kid. I didn't understand why my parents thought, no, this is important, and I'm thankful for it. And so I feel like he's doing something really good for the country.
Yeah. Nicholas, something that just came to me that I have to ask, because I think in the world we're in today, to be able to find something that gives us joy is sort of rare for a lot of people. And I use the word joy intentionally here. Describe the joy that you have in helping friends with their passion and bringing it to fruition. Now, it can kind of go back. Obviously, you were blessed with the sale of your business, so there's some finances that came. But can you quantify or tell us what that emotion is like to be able to do that? Because you've been smiling and you kind of almost a little bit different demeanor in talking about it. Tell us what that's like, because I would love that feeling.
So I appreciate that. I think actually I have that from my dad, who's probably the most generous person I know. He just loves giving back and creating experiences for friends that are super fun. Like, to give an example, he's from South America, lives in Europe, and he has like a little vacation house in Spain. And so he brought alpacas, these llamas.
Yeah.
Now they live in Spain, and I always ask myself, why would do that? It's pretty funny. Every time we come with friends, they're just so excited to play with these animals, and I think that's what he ultimately gets out of it, that people are having a good time. So what is it that I feel? I don't know. That's just what I feel like is incredibly rewarding. I'm lucky to have a lot of good friends. They've been really patient with me over the years, but when I was just heads down and busy and wasn't available. And I like the moments that I enjoy most are the ones when we bring all our friends together and then hearing their stories and hearing how they spend their time. I think, like, on the one hand, I really enjoy that. On the other hand, I'm also calling my friends out when I feel like you're doing something that's not authentic to yourself. And I want my friends to do that for me too. And they do it all the time. Because I think that's how when you're naturally yourself, you just are more joyful.
Right.
I think when you're forced into a role or a position where you're just not 100% comfortable, then it's hard to like celebrate it.
Sure. So you're not just writing a check to help out. You're also, I don't want to say actively involved, but you're interacting and communicating and coaching. I'm a coach, so you're also, iron sharpening iron. You two are bouncing things off each other. Is that correct?
So I wouldn't call it coaching, because these guys are at least as, if not more sophisticated than me. But no, yeah, I'm like, we're chatting all the time, and they ask me questions. I'll ask them the same questions. Like, it's just like two people who are smart, who have different perspectives, exchanging thoughts. Like that quickly makes 1 + 1 to be bigger than 2.
Well, in many ways, that's a good coach. I mean, you've got a background as a golfer. You know that many times the athlete is much more proficient at the actual item.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So the coach,
my coach was great. My coach, she's like, yeah, the technique, we've got this. And now he just kept telling me, you're so good. You're so good. You're the best one here. Just make it happen. It was all making me feel confident. But he also knew me very well, that I was like,
sure,
at moments of doubts every now and then.
So the big thing for me, and I actually see you doing the same thing, is what you do is you're reaching inside people and pulling out greatness, or just enhancing the greatness that's already there. That to me is good coach. I don't know. You have some coach in you. You really do.
Appreciate it. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah. All right. So as we wrap up here, I usually do a couple of wrap ups with a few questions, though. I want you, we talked about, and the word that you used to describe it is, as I saw on the website, digital auto refinance platform.
Yeah.
And tell us, I'm just going to give you time to, tell us a little bit of that story, the journey. Tell people,
Yeah.
I'll let you tell people that might have interest in it, where to go to get more info. Just go ahead and give us big commercial, long commercial, whatever. I'm going to give you the time to do that. I'd love to hear, what's going on, because obviously, we started with passion. I want to finish this podcast with the thing that you're passionate about right now and working on.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Fred. I'll try to keep it short. So car loans are interesting because different than mortgages. Mortgages, you get a mortgage if you have prime credit. It's not available to you if you don't have prime credit. Car loans are available to everyone. It's just the difference is APR, interest rate. And so car loans can be as high as 29%, which this may sound like too aggressive or predatory. I don't actually think at the time of origination, so the day you get your loan, it's predatory, because there's a market for everything. If you were less risky as a borrower, or if people like you, like the portfolio of yous were less risky as a borrower at the time, your rate would be lower. I think it becomes quote unquote predatory if you continue to be disciplined, making your payments for 12, 18, 24 months, and you're still paying the rate as if you were as challenged credit as you were 2 years ago. And so you have three tiers. Let's say one is above 700, second one is 600 to 700 credit score, and another one below 600. If you're in these tiers and make your payments, you actually can jump into the next tier. So somebody who was below 600 credit score and improves their credit score into 650, for example, you're still treated quote unquote as a subprime borrower. But if you were to get a new car loan, you would have a massively lower rate. And so in order to do that, we'll refinance your auto loan. And then you do the same jump from if you're near prime and you made all your payments, then we'll reward you and lower your rate too. And so the whole thinking behind it, or the way we learned about it, is in the challenge credit space, you have two segments. One is, we call it chronically bad credit or behaviorally bad credit, and one we call situationally bad credit. The first group is the one that we actually wanted to help first when we thought about what do we want to spend our next 10 years on. Helping people who don't understand credit better understand it. That's very hard though, because you need to teach somebody financial literacy, and that means you need to actually start very early in life. So that's, I think, very hard, and I haven't come up with a good thought yet. Yeah. The segment you can help a lot are people who were situationally bad credit, quote unquote bad credit, because you had medical bills, you had a divorce, there was a pandemic, you lost your job. Those people have the willingness to pay their loans, but for some reason in the moment lack ability, and that's why they slide down the credit tiers. And so our whole mission is to help people get out of that hole again. The angle we understand very well is car loans, because that's what we've been doing for 7 years. Mm-hmm. The mission is broader though, because if you buy a car, you sign 6 contracts. You sell a car, you buy a car, you have your financing, you have an insurance product, you have warranties, you have gap insurance. And so what we want to become long term is, think of Credit Karma for auto loans, or for your auto ownership, to make sure that every time you qualify for a lower rate, or every time you qualify for a better insurance policy, you get a notification, one click, and we'll take care of it for you.
So someone's in the system, you guys are monitoring that for them and letting them know, listen, you can lower your payment by X, or you can, so you're watching that for them, instead of what in many ways the system does is it's the reverse of that. You miss a payment and all of a sudden it goes up. This way credit cards are. So, and how far along are you, and where are you at as far as the phases of the business?
So we launched, you can go www.withclutch.com, refinance.withclutch.com. You can submit your details. It's very easy. You'll start with a phone number, confirm your phone number, and then it's 2 clicks and you get a firm offer. And then at that point, we'll get in touch with you and allocate you to the best new lender. That'll be the next steps. Will be fully automating all of that, and then broadening the offering, going away from only offering refinance to tell you about all the other products where we can help you improve. And so super early stage. It's Chris and me, and we're building the team as we speak.
Sure. I think I went to the site and it kind of simplifies some things. It says, here's some of the more common vehicles that we could work with. If you have this, click here. Yep. And so there's obviously some data that you already have there. But so if someone's listening, how would they know if there's someone that they need to reach out to? You give a profile or a description of who should get in touch with you now.
Yeah, I think everybody should try at any given time. There's zero cost to doing it. That's I think one thing that people don't think about. Like, the cost is 1 minute of your time. and then you know whether or not you qualify for a lower rate. And then we'll take care of the rest. If you want us to remind you when the time is right, we'll do that. If we can help you in the moment, we'll do that. I think I believe there's no downside to trying, so just try it out. It's like starting a company. You have to start.
Yeah, excellent. Well, what we'll do is we'll make sure down in the notes for the episode that we'll include that link so that people can click and go online and check that out. So thank you for
Awesome.
sharing that.
Yeah,
Nicholas, I'm sure you and I could have discussion at length. We probably busted through the usual time, but you mentioned website. Any other ways that people can connect with you or get in touch with you if they want to do it, however, personally, or if it's just through the company, that's fine. What would you prefer?
No, of course. Go to LinkedIn, look for Nicholas Hinrichsen, or look for Nicholas Carlipso or Nicholas Carvana. You'll find me. Connect with me. I'd love to hear what you're up to. If you're working on a new business, happy to help. If you want me to help you refinance your car loan, if you have any other thoughts and questions, feedback. If you have feedback is a gift. So I'll take it and thank you for it.
Yeah, excellent. What's next for you, Nicholas? Short-term, long-term, whatever?
So the very next thing is after we speak, I think I have a few conversations. I'll sit down with Chris. I'm in Phoenix as we speak, about to go back to the Bay Area to sit next to Chris, because the last time we started a company, it was literally in a garage. We might to move to his living room to begin with, and then figure out whether or not we want to be completely remote or not. So these are interesting questions we need to deal with the next couple of months, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, definitely keep me updated. And
I will.
as always, I don't know what I could do, but if I could help you with guys with anything, let me know. The title of our podcast, Nicholas, is Seek, Go, Create. Which one of those words says something to you and why?
I think I said it earlier. I just took the question and answered earlier. I think I would naturally pick create probably, and I think that goes back to the initial conversation we have. Like somebody who seeks and this is how I'm envisioning Chris, my co-founder. He just seeks for opportunities and seeks for these gaps that we talked about or misalignments. Yeah. Once he finds them, he presents 10 to me. Usually, I'll tell him these 9 I don't agree with. This one I agree with, and then I start creating. I think in our relationship, that's just more the role I play, and that's why I picked the word.
That's awesome. Yeah, you did mention that earlier. Thank you again for joining us on the podcast, Nicholas. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. If you would like to continue the conversation, and I really encourage you to do that, we welcome that. Go to seekgocreate.com. That's seekgocreate.com to comment on this episode, ask questions. I'll reach back out to Nicholas if it's something specific to him and see if he could jump in and maybe answer or communicate with it. You can also find us and communicate on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those places we are Seek, Go, Create. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you on the Seek, Go, Create podcast in the near future.